Hi, hope you're doing well today. I want to remind you to please just continue to check in on each other, or other members of the church community. That doesn't have to be a big thing, just a message or a phone call or an email to say how you're doing. Is there anything that you need help with, anything I can do for you, anything I can pray for you? And if you're able to communicate things like that to me so we can let the wider church know if that's appropriate, then that's really, really helpful, because as we continue through this lockdown period, it really helps if we can keep each other informed in the way we normally would do if we were seeing each other at church on Sundays and on other occasions, just to continue that sense of community that's so important to us as a church family. We're now in the church season of Epiphany. Epiphany was actually earlier this week, and as you're probably aware, that's the moment in the church's year when we reflect on the three Magi, well, not necessarily three, but the Magi visiting Jesus, the wise men, the kings of Orient are, to quote the carol. And that account is found in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. If you've got that open in front of you, that would be really helpful. We have these Magi who hear of the birth of Jesus. They come from east Jerusalem, and they make their way to Herod to find out where he is. Where is this King of the Jews? And Herod, as Matthew records in verse 3 of chapter 2, is disturbed. He gets all the chief priests together, teachers of the law, and he asks them where this Messiah, this King of the Jews, was born, and he's told in Bethlehem. Herod calls the Magi to him secretly and finds out from the exact time that the star that had led them here had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem. Asking them to look for Jesus, and as soon as they found him, to report back to him. And they hear about this, they go on their way, they meet Jesus, they give him their gifts of gold, frankincense, of myrrh, and having worshipped Jesus, they, as Joseph did before Jesus was born, are warned by God in a dream, spoken to by God in a dream, not to go back to Herod, and they return to their country by another route. It's the season of Epiphany, the season where we reflect on what it means to encounter God in very particular and direct ways, and this is the first example of that. And there's a lot to say about this, and of course it's a very familiar part of the narrative that we tell in the Christmas season and the time after Christmas. And I want to draw out just a couple of themes for us this morning. The first is that anything that we do in relation to following Jesus is going to involve difficulty, struggle, opposition in some way. Whether that's worshipping God, whether that's following him, committing to him, whether that's a particular act that we're undertaking in obedience to God's call in our lives, whether it's financial giving, whether it's praying, whatever it is we do that is flowing out of our relationship with God and our desire to draw close to Jesus, that's going to bring with it suffering and difficulty. Now, there are lots of other places in the Gospels where we read about Jesus receiving things from people in different ways. We think about the time when his feet were anointed with perfume by a woman. We think about his friendships. We think about when he leads a donkey for the triumphal entry. And I thought particularly this week also, as well as this story of the Magi bringing their gifts to Jesus, I thought this week of the accounts that we have in the Gospels of the loaves and fishes, the miracle that Jesus performs with a few loaves and a few fish to feed thousands and thousands of people. And in Mark's Gospel, that immediately precedes the disciples in a lake, or in a boat on the lake, and a storm blowing up on the lake, and then getting very, very afraid, and then seeing Jesus walking on the water towards them, and the fear response of seeing someone walking on the water, and then Jesus getting into the boat and calming the storm. And the little detail that Mark records there in Mark chapter 6, verse 52 is that the disciples, were completely amazed because they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. The fear had overwhelmed them. The fear of the storm blowing up had overwhelmed them to such an extent that they couldn't see Jesus for who he was, because they hadn't really understood what was going on with that miracle of the loaves and the fishes feeding all those thousands. Now, the reality is that we will always face things in our lives, in our desire to be obedient to Jesus and to live life the way that he wants us to. We will always face things that are overwhelming, that cause suffering, that cause pain, that seem too much for us. So it was for the disciples when Jesus said, "You feed these crowds." And all they had was a few loaves and a few fish. They would have been overwhelmed, but give those few loaves and the fish to Jesus, and it becomes more than enough for all the crowds gathered. So it was for the Magi. They faced a manipulative, abusive, bullying leader, trying to trick them so that he could get the information he wanted. There will be suffering and struggle and opposition in any moment, any project, any rhythm of life that we seek to undertake in response to Jesus. That's just the way life is. None of us like that, of course. But we're in a war zone. We're in a war zone between an ultimately good and perfect God as revealed to us in Jesus, and the spiritual forces that seek to kill, steal, and destroy. So there will be struggle. And it's so easy to slip into the mindset where we think that having success, whether that's financial or practical, whether seeing a ministry grow numerically, seeing peace in a household, seeing things happen just as we want them to happen and intend for them to happen. It's so easy to get into the mindset where we think, oh, that must mean that God is in this and God is doing this and we're being obedient to God's will. Now, of course, that might be the case, but the reality is, if we look at Scripture, anybody seeking to do God's will meets immense pain and struggle and suffering. The Magi were just wanting to bring gifts to the baby and his family. And they had to face down this powerful, paranoid, abusive bully. So maybe we need to turn our assumptions on their heads and think, actually, if everything's happening as we think they're meant to be happening, and everything seems to be smooth sailing, maybe that's not the route that we should be on. It's not that we go out of our way looking for difficulty and pain and struggle. We're not masochists. But we need to understand that Jesus' way, seeking Jesus, coming to Jesus, giving to Jesus, is hard. And it will involve sacrifice and suffering and struggle and pain. Following Jesus, worshipping him, bringing our gifts to him as worship and dedication, serving him with our lives and our money and our possessions and our time and our talents, is an invitation into that storm that the disciples find themselves in. It's an invitation into an encounter with the people who would seek to oppose us, as it was for the Magi meeting Herod. And it's an invitation to find peace and the presence of Jesus in the midst of all that. As the hymn writer wrote, and as we love to sing, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul, not because everything's easy, but it is well with my soul even with all the storms and the struggle and the pain and the darkness around. Anything we do that is an act of obedience towards Jesus and seeking to serve him and live his way will involve a degree of suffering and struggle and opposition. So the call, the invitation, is to stay focused on him. We think of Peter setting his eyes on Jesus to walk on the water. And as soon as he takes his eyes off Jesus, he starts to struggle, and Jesus has to reach down and pull him out of the water. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for me? How do we keep our eyes on Jesus? Well, I think we all need to remember that the image that so many people project, including ourselves sometimes, of everything being okay and we're okay despite all the things going on in the world, and that we've got everything we need, and that life is a success and everything is sorted and the ministry is easy and flowing as we want it to be. But that is not the real picture. That, if you're on social media, so often most of us only put on Facebook or Instagram or wherever it is the things that look good, things that look nice, that look attractive. Yeah, I'm richly blessed today. 25 likes. But that's not actually the truth. You scratch beneath the surface and there's been struggle and pain to get there. Or there is struggle and pain and we're just denying it. I think actually of our good friend James Thomas, who was a member of this church who died a few years ago. And one of the things we found when we were preparing for his funeral is we looked at his CV, and on his CV was a list of things of business projects he'd attempted or tried to get off the ground that had gone wrong. And that's really struck me, that really stayed with me. Because it's a way of saying, I don't have it all together. How many of us embrace the things that don't go as they should do and wear those almost as a badge of honour? We need to keep asking for God's help to be faithful and to keep our eyes fixed on him, to put our eyes on him who's calling us across the water, across the waves, into and through the storm. Not pretending that the storm isn't there. If we acknowledge that the storm is there, if we own the reality that the storm is there, if we look after ourselves in the way we need to look after ourselves because of the fact the storm is there, and are obedient and are faithful to Jesus, then we may find him and experience him and draw close to him in the midst of it, and be able to offer our gifts of gold and frankincense of myrrh, our talent, our time, our energy, our money, whatever it is, to him, without the false statements that it's all okay and it's all easy. See the circumstances for what they are, grieve them, feel them, experience them as we need to. And as Jesus did, for the joy that is set before us, let us endure and fix our eyes on him, the author and perfecter of our faith. And the second thing I want to highlight, as well as that reality that there is always suffering and struggle and pain in any act of obedience, any act of following Jesus, is to remember that God takes what we bring to him. Of course, the Magi turn up to meet Jesus and the family with gold and frankincense and myrrh, and I'm sure many of us have heard before or read before about the different symbolisms and ideas contained within each of those gifts, and that's good to go into perhaps on another occasion. But let's be honest, very few of us are bringing anything as interesting or as valuable financially as gold or frankincense or myrrh. After or as we struggle through life, through a pandemic or through financial problems or health problems or bereavements or whatever it is, we feel that if we do even get to Jesus, we get to him with just maybe a few twigs in our hand, nothing like as fancy as gold or frankincense. But God takes what we have. He takes the few loaves and fishes and feeds thousands. He takes the talents in the parable that the people have invested and made to work, and he brings something bigger and more significant out of them. Our job is to just bring what we have, to be who we are and who we can be, to be obedient in the way that we can be obedient, to shape our lives around Jesus in the way we can shape our lives around Jesus, and to leave the multiplication of that, the blessing of that, the fruitfulness of that to the power and majesty and might of Jesus himself. Apply that to your own life. Do you reach 2021 with financial worries and physical health worries, worries about relationships? Do you struggle to even believe that there is a God at all, that Jesus is good? Who could blame you after the year that so many of us have endured? Well, remember the mustard seed. Remember the little yeast that is needed to do what yeast does. The miracles that God will work in us and through us may not look like what we expect them or would necessarily choose them to look like, but they will be the miracles of treasure in jars of clay, of yeast spreading far beyond its size, of a mustard seed that tastes far more powerful than a little seed would suggest. I've said before how when we first started to have children in our lives, the therapist I was seeing said to me, remember, you don't have to be the perfect parent, you just have to be good enough. And how true that is. It's easy to think, looking at the work that others do and the parenting on the ministry or the lives that others lead, again, on social media or wherever it is, think we have to get it right all the time and that any mistake is a problem. No. We just need to do our bit. We just need to be faithful. We just need to keep turning up, confessing our mistakes and our failures, and offering what little we have, the few twigs or the gold or the frankincense or the myrrh, or the couple of $100 we have, or the little bit of energy we have, or the tiny grain of salt of faith that we have, or whatever it is, and we just need to take that and bring that to the Holy Family, to Jesus in the stable. We don't have to have the perfect gift. We don't have to be the perfect disciple, because we can't be. We just have to keep turning up, to keep our eyes fixed on the author and perfecter of our faith, to trust him with the results, and to not worry about how others may appear to be doing, but to focus in the ways that help us focus on Jesus. I'm going to offer you a couple of reflective questions in the next WhatsApp message to help you think about these themes now and over the course of the next week, and to maybe help attach some practicalities to this idea of fixing our eyes on Jesus. But whatever is in your hands today, whether it feels like gold or frankincense or myrrh or just the very least that is possible for you to bring, just focus on the one that you're giving it to. It's not about you, so you can trust him with the gift and let him do the rest.